Before the pyramids kissed the sky, before the first prophets whispered the name of God, there was a rebellion. But not the kind you've heard in church. This wasn't Lucifer's war. This was something more tragic, more intimate, more forgotten. 200 divine beings, watchers, angels, emissaries of heaven, descended not with swords, but with longing. They weren't cast down. They chose to fall. They looked upon the daughters of men, and they loved them so deeply, so desperately, that they broke the oldest law in the cosmos. They took human wives, and with them, they birthed something unholy. The Nephilim, giants, tyrants, monsters carved from divine power and human hunger. But that's not the story you were told. Because somewhere along the way, this tale was buried, erased, scrubbed from the Western Bible, labeled heresy. But Ethiopia remembered. In her mountains, her monasteries, her chants in the Ge'ez tongue, this story still lives, untouched by Rome, untouched by empire. And if what you're about to hear is true, then everything you know about good and evil, angels and demons, rebellion and redemption is incomplete. Because this wasn't just a fall from grace, it was a cosmic betrayal and the origin of a spiritual war that still rages today. Stay with me until part 6, where we'll uncover what truly became of the fallen angels' children, how their spirits never died and may still be shaping your world today from within. You don't want to miss it. Comment below, "I'm here for the truth Ethiopia never erased." Like this video, bell subscribe, and help restore what was stolen from our spiritual memory. This is the story of the Watchers, and what happens when divine power chooses shadow over light.
Imagine this. A monk stands in the cool shadow of a mountain monastery. In his hands is a weathered parchment, ink faded, edges frayed, but the words still alive, still sacred. Now imagine this. That same parchment, that same book, was once read aloud in churches across the ancient world, revered, quoted, until one day it was banned, burned, erased. But Ethiopia never let it die. There was a time, long before the Bible looked the way it does today, when early Christians read a very different set of scriptures. Among them was the Book of Enoch. Not a strange fringe text, not a heresy, but a beloved book read by church fathers like Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria. A book that dared to describe not just heaven's glory, but heaven's greatest scandal. It told the story of angels who fell, not because they hated God, but because they desired something else, us. It was raw, uncomfortable, too powerful, and so it was silenced. By the 4th century, at the councils of Laodicea and later Nicaea, the emerging Roman Church began curating what was acceptable truth. Enoch didn't make the cut. Some say it was too mystical. Others say it gave too much power to the people, too much spiritual depth outside of priestly control. But whatever the reason, the result was the same. The book disappeared from the West, but not from the world. Because far to the southeast, in the Ethiopian highlands, something remarkable happened. Christianity had already taken root there by the time Rome was still persecuting believers. But Ethiopia never bowed to Roman authority, never submitted to Constantinople's canon. And so when the West erased Enoch, Ethiopia enshrined it. They didn't just preserve the book, they lived it. For nearly 2,000 years, the Book of Enoch has been read in the ancient liturgy of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, chanted in Ge'ez, the sacred tongue, passed from monk to monk in silence and reverence, copied by hand in monasteries carved into the face of mountains. It's not just ink and paper there. It's prophecy. It's memory. It's a mirror into a deeper, more dangerous truth. And then something happened that shook the modern world. In the 1940s, fragments of the Book of Enoch were discovered in the Qumran caves, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This wasn't a medieval invention. This wasn't a forgery. It was real, ancient, widely read by the early followers of Yeshua, Jesus. It confirmed what Ethiopia never forgotten, that Enoch was once part of the spiritual bloodstream of the faith, that someone, somewhere, had tried to bury something that refused to die. But the question is, why? Why would an entire civilization try to erase a book that reveals so much? Is it because Enoch tells the truth about angels who chose love over obedience? Because it reveals that the corruption of the world didn't start with humans alone, but with divine beings who crossed a line? Or is it something deeper still, something we've only begun to uncover? Because what Ethiopia preserved is more than a book. It's a revelation. And the next part of this story takes us to the mountain where it all began, where 200 angels made a decision that would echo through eternity.
What if the first great sin wasn't hatred, but love? Not the kind we sing about in church, not the patient, selfless love of agape, but the kind of love that burns, that obsesses, that crosses lines it was never meant to cross. Because that is how the angels fell. Long before the flood, before Moses, before the 10 Commandments, 200 angels stood at the edge of heaven and made a choice. They were called the Watchers, or Irian in the ancient tongue. Their mission was noble, to watch over humanity, guide us, protect us. But watching turned into wanting, and wanting turned into rebellion. The Book of Enoch tells us they descended to earth at a place called Mount Hermon, a towering snow-capped range that still stands today on the border of modern-day Lebanon and Syria. There, they swore an unbreakable oath, one that bound them together, not in righteousness, but in transgression. At the head of this celestial rebellion was Simjasa, a name the West has forgotten, but Ethiopia remembers well. He was powerful, brilliant, charismatic, and he led the Watchers into a pact that would change the course of history. They took human wives, they broke divine law, they crossed the barrier between heaven and earth. And from that forbidden union came something the world had never seen before. The Nephilim, giants, men of renown, but not heroes, tyrants, monsters born of divine power and human desire. They were not just physically massive, they were spiritually ravenous. According to Enoch, the Nephilim consumed everything in their path, the food of men, the blood of animals, the very peace of the earth. And their fathers, the Watchers, did not stop them. Instead, they taught more. They gave humanity forbidden knowledge, Nun,
the art of war, how to forge swords and kill with precision. Waxing gibbous moon, the secrets of the stars, not to read the heavens but to manipulate fate. Full moon, the use of enchantments, seduction, mind control, manipulation. Waning gibbous moon, even cosmetics, how to alter the face to incite lust. This wasn't divine generosity, it was colonization of the human soul. And the world paid the price. And here's the part that Western churches never told you. Genesis does mention this event in a single cryptic verse. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. Genesis 6:2. But that's it. A passing reference. No names, no consequences, no Nephilim, no cosmic betrayal. Why? Because the rest of the story was stripped away, filed under myth, locked behind centuries of silence. But Ethiopia never looked away. To this day, in the chants of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the story of the Watchers is not just remembered, it is mourned. Because they weren't demons, they were angels, and they fell not in rage, but in longing. Which makes the next part of the story even more haunting. Because when heaven finally responds to their rebellion, it doesn't just punish, it intervenes. But what happens when archangels descend not to protect, but to pass judgment? And what becomes of the children of the Watchers when their bodies die, but their spirits remain?
What if the rise of civilization wasn't entirely human? What if the very things that built our world, tools, weapons, technology, beauty, were never meant to be ours? At least, not yet. This is the part of the story where things get uncomfortable. Because the angels didn't just fall, they taught. And what they taught changed everything. When the Watchers descended to earth, they didn't just take wives. They brought with them the secrets of heaven. But they didn't share those secrets as gifts. They shared them as weapons. The Book of Enoch tells us the names of specific Watchers and the forbidden arts they unleashed. Azazel taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Kokabel revealed the secrets of astrology. Semja taught enchantments and root-cutting, early sorcery. Penamua taught how to manipulate the mind. And others taught how to beautify the eyelids, dye the hair, decorate the body. None of this was about survival. It was about seduction, control, power. They gave humanity technology before we had the spiritual maturity to use it. Sound familiar? Today, we're unlocking secrets of our own. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum weapons, neural implants. We can alter DNA, replicate consciousness, even control weather. But has our morality evolved alongside our mastery? Or are we repeating the same pattern, learning too much, too fast, without knowing who we're becoming? In the Ethiopian tradition, the sin of the Watchers wasn't just lust, it was acceleration. They pushed humanity forward before we were ready. They gave us godlike abilities without godlike wisdom. And when we used those tools, we didn't build peace, we built empires. We didn't heal the earth, we carved it open. In their teachings, they planted the seeds of conquest, the lust for power, the desire to dominate not just nature,
but each other. And this is where the story turns from myth to mirror. Because if we're honest, we've done the same thing. We invented the internet, and now we can't control it. We built bombs before we built boundaries. We've learned to extend life, but not to value it. And the voices of the watchers still whisper, faster, smarter, more. But at what cost? The Book of Enoch says the earth cried out under the weight of this corruption, and the heavens heard, not with sadness, but with fury. Because heaven didn't just watch, it responded. And when heaven responds, it doesn't send a message, it sends archangels. So what happens when Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel are dispatched to deal with divine rebellion? And more importantly, what happens when the punishment isn't just death, but eternal imprisonment?
They thought heaven had gone silent. The Watchers had descended. They had broken the covenant. They had taught forbidden things, fathered unnatural children, and watched the earth bleed beneath them. And for a time, it seemed as if no one would stop them. But heaven hears, and heaven responds, not with thunder, not with earthquakes, but with judgment. According to the Book of Enoch, the cries of the earth rose up like incense, not in praise, but in pain. The trees withered, the rivers dried, the blood of men and beasts flowed in the valleys, and the sky grew dark with mourning. And then 4 figures moved across the heavens: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, not as messengers, but as warriors. They stood before the throne of the Most High and presented the evidence. The earth has been defiled by the sins of the Watchers. Their children, the Nephilim, consume all things. They cause war, bloodshed, and despair. They must be stopped. And the sentence came swiftly. The Watchers would be bound, chained beneath the earth in a prison called Dudael, a dark, fiery abyss with walls of jagged rock and rivers of molten flame. There they would remain, not for a lifetime, but until the final judgment. The Nephilim, their half-human, half-divine children, would not escape either. God sent a cleansing flood, not just to reset humanity, but to erase the corruption that had infected creation itself. The giants were drowned, their bodies destroyed. But, and this is the part the West forgets, their spirits lived on. The Book of Enoch says their souls became evil spirits, disembodied forces of chaos and temptation. And according to Ethiopian tradition, these are the true origin of demons, not fallen angels, but the orphaned offspring of heaven's greatest scandal. Think about that for a moment. The demons that Jesus cast out, the spirits that still torment and haunt to this day, may not be rebellious angels, but what's left of the Nephilim. Born of divine rebellion, cursed to roam the earth, and still hungry. In the Western world, we often picture demons with horns and tails, cartoons, caricatures. But in the Ethiopian tradition, they are more tragic, more personal. They were once children, once loved, once full of divine potential. But they were born of violation, born of a union that was never meant to be. And now, their punishment is to wander forever. Which brings us to a deeper question. If their spirits never left, are we still living in the consequences of that rebellion today? Because if the Watchers were bound beneath the earth, What if the spirits of their children are still walking upon it? And if so, how would we know?
Somewhere in the highlands of East Africa, beyond the dust of empire and the silence of erased scripture, there is a church carved straight into stone. It has no stained glass, no organ, no steeple, just shadow, incense, and scripture, written in a language the world forgot, but heaven still remembers. This is Ethiopia, and it may be the last place on earth where the full story of the Watchers still lives. While Rome edited, while Constantinople selected, while councils debated what should be called sacred, Ethiopia simply preserved. The Book of Enoch, cast out from the Western canon, was never lost here. It remained part of the living liturgy of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. It wasn't shelved, it was sung. It wasn't hidden, it was handed down, generation to generation, monk to monk, family to family. Written in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language older than Latin itself, these manuscripts still survive today. Not in museums, but in mountain monasteries hidden above the clouds, guarded, cherished, alive. In the caves of Lalibela, where 11 churches were cut by hand from solid rock, in the ancient city of Aksum, where tradition says the Ark of the Covenant rests beneath veil and vow, Ethiopia didn't just protect holy things, it protected forbidden things. Things too uncomfortable for the empires to preserve, stories too powerful to be controlled, truths that remind us that heaven doesn't only speak in Latin or Greek. Sometimes it speaks through the dust of Africa. And that makes Ethiopia not just a country, not just a place on the map, but a living archive, a sacred vault. While the Western world turned the fallen angels into metaphor, Ethiopia remembered them by name. Simjaza, Azazel, Armoros. While modern theology reduced demons to vague symbols of evil, Ethiopia traced them back to their origin, the spirits of the Nephilim, the children of divine rebellion. And here's what's most astonishing. Long before archaeology confirmed the Dead Sea Scrolls, long before Western scholars began to dust off Enoch, Ethiopia had already been reading it for centuries. They never needed a cave in Qumran to believe. They never needed a council to tell them what was true. They already knew, because they remembered. So if you're wondering where to look for the original understanding of angels, demons, and divine justice, don't just look in Rome. Don't just look in Jerusalem. Look in the shadows of Lalibela, in the libraries of Aksum, in the chants of monks who have never forgotten. Because when the rest of the world buried Enoch, Ethiopia became his sanctuary. But this raises an even deeper question. If Ethiopia remembered this truth for 2,000 years, what else have they preserved? And more urgently, if the spirits of the Nephilim were never destroyed, could they still be here? Not in myth, not in metaphor, but in us. What if the Watchers never left? What if their bodies were buried in chains beneath the earth, but their whispers still crawl through our thoughts? What if the rebellion that began on Mount Hermon never truly ended? The Book of Enoch says that when the Nephilim were killed in the flood, their spirits did not die. Their souls, half angel and half human, became something else, something worse. And now the giants who are produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth. They shall afflict, oppress, destroy, attack. They shall cause sorrow and suffering. Book of Enoch, chapter 15. These are not fallen angels. They are the orphan spirits of divine rebellion, disembodied,
wandering, denied heaven, banished from earth, hungry for chaos. In Ethiopian tradition, this is where demons come from. Not from hellfire, not from Satan's army, but from the broken lineages of angels and mortals, from a sin that created beings too unnatural to belong in any realm. They roam not to possess, but to feed, on fear, on violence, on manipulation. And when you look at the world today, when you see endless war, obsession with forbidden knowledge, moral confusion wrapped in spiritual language, you have to ask, are we truly alone in our madness? We think of demons as medieval myths, but what if they are more subtle now? What if they work through systems, not shadows? Through culture, not curses? What if the Watcher's legacy is not horns and smoke, but the normalized corruption of the human soul? The desire for forbidden power, the worship of knowledge without wisdom, the sacrifice of innocence in exchange for influence. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Ethiopia teaches that the war between spirit and flesh isn't past tense, it's ongoing. The same forces that taught sorcery, war, seduction, and domination, they haven't disappeared. They've just adapted. They no longer teach from mountaintops. They influence from screens, from headlines, from policies, from pulpits. And they don't always look evil. Sometimes they look like light. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. So the question is no longer, did the Watchers fall? We know they did. The real question is, did we rise from their fall, or are we still living in its shadow? Are we the healed or the haunted? And that brings us to the final, most dangerous part of this story. Because if we are still haunted by the Watchers, then the war they started is not over. So the real mystery becomes, who are we in that story? Victims? Witnessers? Or something far more terrifying? Successors?
What if we're not just telling an ancient story, but reliving it? What if the line between watcher and watched, between sacred and profane, between warning and fulfillment, has already been crossed again? We began with angels who fell for love, beings of light who traded heaven for desire. They gave us knowledge before we had wisdom, power before we had restraint. They believed they could rewrite the balance between spirit and flesh. And for that, they were judged, bound, forgotten, erased from most of our history books, but never erased from Ethiopia's memory. But now, look around. We build machines that think. We manipulate DNA. We seek to escape death itself by uploading consciousness, freezing bodies, rewriting biology. We stare into the heavens, not to worship, but to conquer. We name planets, build towers to the sky, teach algorithms to predict our souls. We are not just progressing, we are accelerating again. And the question becomes chilling. Are we becoming the new Watchers? Ethiopia's ancient warning wasn't about fear. It was about remembrance. A mirror held up to every generation. A chance to ask, will we repeat the rebellion or redeem it? Because hidden inside the fall of the Watchers is a terrible beauty. They fell not from hatred, but from misdirected love. They wanted to be closer, to connect, to share light. But without boundaries, even light can burn.
So maybe the true warning isn't just about demons and giants and floods. Maybe it's about us. What do we do with what we know? Do we seek truth to heal or to control? Do we build to protect or do we dominate? Do we rise or do we fall again? You see, the divine rebellion wasn't just a moment. It's a pattern. And patterns left unchecked become cycles, and cycles unbroken become destinies. So now, at the edge of AI, gene editing, weaponized truth, and monetized identity, we stand on a new Mount Hermon. Will we take the oath, or will we remember what happened the last time heaven was defied? Because redemption is still possible, but it begins with remembrance. And remembrance begins with listening to the voices that empire tried to silence, with opening the books they buried, and with hearing the story Ethiopia never forgot. Ethiopia, in preserving the tale of the Watchers, preserved a mirror into the divine, a glimpse of what happens when power rebels against wisdom, and light is seduced by shadow. So the final question is not about angels or demons or Nephilim. It's about us. Will we be the generation that breaks the cycle or completes it?